Welcome to 50/50 Books, the book review podcast where the books are split in two and figuring out just what is going on is a toss-up. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Jonathan. This episode we're finishing up If Tomorrow Doesn't Come by Jen St. Jude. All right, so let's start with our general vibes on how we're feeling hitting the end of the book. What are you thinking, Taylor?
I mean, we got the ending you expected, which are never my favorite endings, so...
I learned from our last one.
Yeah.
that we had like this, yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of disappointing. And then there were a few other things that didn't feel completely finished to me, so I think overall I'm just kind of a bit unsatisfied. But obviously, we'll get more into all of that. What about you?
I think overall I did enjoy the book. I think you're right that there's a few things that didn't really get resolved in the second half that I would have expected. I think I had kind of the grace of the fact that we had a pretty good gap between these two recordings, and so I kind of forgot about some of those things by the time I read the second half of the book, and so I don't feel like it was as strong as an effect as if I had just read straight through it. But that being said, like, even though the style of the book seemed to change a little bit in the second half, like it did feel more romance focused in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
That has disappointed me more in other books than it did here. Like here, I actually didn't mind it. I wanted to know more about it and explore that a little bit more. So for that part, I was satisfied. I didn't really mind that the end was the way I theorized it in this case. I think there still are the questions of like just curiosity-based questions of what would have happened if we got more and what was the result of the asteroid hitting and things like that. But they're not in the category of questions I need answered. So I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah.
So one of the first things we get back into is a flashback to when Avery is actually moving into college, driving up to college and moving in.
We obviously get the, I guess it's stereotypical portrayal of like moving into your dorm room when your parents are there. And we get this idea of reinventing yourself during college. Like if your life sucked before, don't worry. College, you can be whoever you want and things will be better magically. They'll just be better, which is bullshit, obviously. And it's also not helped when almost immediately Avery's parents are kind of like talking her up for no reason. It's like, Oh, this is Avery. She volunteers at the church and she's, the golden child of our town. It's like, great, now you've put all these expectations on me and talked about me to these people who knew nothing about me, and now I can't define myself. You've defined me, which is what she's had to deal with basically her entire life. It is kind of the first hint of like college will be no different. People will still suck. You will still be the same person unless you like actively make that change yourself. It is not magic. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts there actually. There's this one aspect of inauthenticity, right? Like when you have that I should reinvent myself because I can situation, you're right. Like you're not really changing yourself. You're just kind of performing a certain way. And that's not going to sustain itself and certainly not lead to happiness, right? And that's kind of what her parents are trying to set her up for. The other thing that's interesting here, though, is the context that it's an Ivy League school. Like, I think there is at least from my experience at one, like there's a pretty strong distinction between how parents perceive what going to an Ivy League school is and what they are now that I think is probably just informed by the way they used to be. So like what it would have been like if their peers went to an Ivy League school where there is, and not that this doesn't exist at all, but like where they get this sense of you're here to social climb and like make your mark in a big pond, right? Like be a big fish in a big pond. Which is really difficult to do in an Ivy League school, first of all, because there are so many people who have done so many impressive things before they even got there. But that's also generally, I've found, not what people are really interested in, right? Like, I think, at least where I went, like, people were interested in kind of the way Aisha was, where it's like, that's cool that you did those things. I want to know more about you as a person, right? Like, it's like, that's an awesome background. I can respect those things. That's not exactly like how I'm going to build my relationship with you, though. It's not like I'm not ranking you in a certain way because of those things. Like there's more beyond that. And I didn't get this a lot from my parents directly, but I definitely saw it like inklings of kind of old school thinking about what it means to go to like a prestigious university come out of them at times, and especially with other people's parents too. So
Avery actually got quite lucky, I think, having Aisha as a roommate, because it is that difference between wanting to build a relationship and wanting to like network, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like they very much did want Avery to be like stand out, and Avery's like, I'm just trying to live,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that kind of connects you too is as far as like the way that her parents want her to be painted at college is this conversation they have on the way there where Avery's mom gets a little bit uptight about her saying, like, trying to say again that she's gay and not wanting her to be like out and about with it at college. This is something I kind of actually had happened to me, but in high school, where like I came out to my mom and she was like, okay, like, but like don't tell people at school, like I don't want you to be bullied, I don't want you to be seen a certain way, like I also don't want you to like label yourself because like, you know, that can be restrictive, which like that part I believe less, but you know, the rest of it I could kind of understand, like from their perspective, like the fear, right? You know, they're older than us, they grew up in a time where it was even worse for gay people, right? And so I see the aspect where it's coming from. Not to say that it's untouched by personal bias. Like I think part of this could just be coming from they are not accepting of gay people, and this is a way to keep it down and like hope that their kid will change. But I can't entirely fault them for like having some personal safety fear for their kid, as well as like, yeah, this idea that like people are gonna judge her, you know, prejudge her based on this label that she may have, you know, shared with people that she has. The missing part of that being that you might not actually want the people in your life who would judge you for that, and so leaving it to the person to decide how they're going to navigate that identity for themselves would be better.
Right. Like, we obviously see instances where people are garbage at this school, like they are still bigots, and the whole deal with Meredith and like being gay is obviously an issue in some aspects. And those are supposed to be her teammates, like Avery's teammates, that are saying this shit. But it is, to your point, like, are those the people you want around you? No, probably not. And it's tougher when you're like forced to be around those people, right? Because you're participating in the same sport as them. But this is seemingly quite recent. It's not like it's taking place in the early 2000s or like before that.
Exactly.
And of course, people are still going to be garbage regardless of the time period, but it is more plausible you will find your people at college now.
And like, I personally like couldn't relate to this idea of this Ivy League school being full of like well, not like full of gay people, I guess, on the other, to put it from the other angle. And I know I like went to the school that is maybe known for having a lot of gay folks at it, but just it was such a norm for us. I can't imagine this sort of landscape at a Ivy League school.
Yeah, and obviously I don't have like the jock perspective. I don't know what sports is like. But yeah, it just sucks that like her parents' perspective of like staying basically in the closet and being quiet about that kind of stuff is reinforced by like everybody she's around. Because the one gay person she's engaging with, Meredith, is kind of in her slut era, which good, you know, whatever you want. As long as it's consensual, I don't mind. Yeah. But she doesn't have like any actual gay peers, and seemingly there is no gay person that exists in like a supportive way. Like Aisha kind of is ace, which like my queen, love that. But obviously that's very different from being a lesbian.
Yeah,
they cannot have similar conversations about what those experiences are like, and Aisha's obviously not out either. So
yeah, it's so interesting because Aisha, I know she was covering up for the actual like the suicide attempt, but when she goes into the whole thing of like, it was so sad to me that you like weren't out to like the soccer team. It's like, well, I mean, if you saw everything else that was happening, you might understand why, but also you're not. So
yeah, it was, we can talk about this more later, but it's so weird how entitled so many people felt to Avery's secrets and her feelings.
Yes, totally.
Can all of you just shut the fuck up? Like, right. I don't like, there is kind of, somebody has to reach first, right? When you're exchanging secrets like this. And Avery does kind of is like, why didn't you tell me about your sister? And like she does it too a little bit with Aisha, but it's the same, like, turnabout is fair play. Like, Aisha, why would Avery tell you anything? Neither of you reached out. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's a good point because most of the time I found myself agreeing with Aisha, but there is definitely some hypocrisy and imbalance in that. And like, this is the complication of communication and friendship. Like, you do kind of need to give and take a bit in order to get those things out and make someone feel comfortable enough to share those things. Right,
especially if you see, and this is more with Tally, but like, obviously Avery is struggling in soccer. Like, she is not doing well, and her teammates are talking shit about her, and Aisha is privy to all of that information.
Right.
So it's like, within the circumstances going on, Aisha clearly is the one in this scenario that needs to reach first. And not just kind of be there in like a quiet way. Like, you kind of need to say the word sometimes. And Avery being honest about her aunts, and even feeling like she's oversharing when they kind of first meet, and then not being reciprocated with the sister, and then no other forms of support really being shown in any capacity. Like, why would Avery feel like sharing any information with Aisha after all of that?
One other thing I wanted to bring up before we move to the next thing too is with that car ride situation was Avery makes this kind of offhand in her head comment about how she thinks her parents could have lost their accents if they wanted to, but kind of kept them around to like stay authentic to themselves. Which I think is funny because there's such a thread in this, in this conversation, but I think throughout the rest of this book about performing authentically, I'll say this book is doing a really good job of touching on my college background because I majored in linguistics. This is definitely not how things work. Like, people don't just kind of like lose accents. I love like the culture around this of like, oh, like I moved to this place and I like picked up an accent. It's like, no, you didn't. Like, that's just simply not how like adult language works. So kudos to you if you learned it, but you didn't just pick it up. But it's funny that she's like, so she seems kind of proud of them for still speaking, openly with their Irish accents, and is like refuses to be proud of herself for doing anything authentic. So it's just kind of a shame, honestly. But I think it's one of those things where it's like a lot easier to give other people credit for the things they do than yourself, even though there's no credit to be given here.
Yeah, I also think this might just be my negative perspective, but there are some moments where it feels like the parents are talked up and like painted in kind of this positive light because we're supposed to not hate them by the end of this book.
Right.
So like them keeping their accents or like still doing things that are authentically Irish or whatever is supposed to be seen in this as this positive, but it's like they're not really doing anything. They're doing the bare minimum.
For sure, like it's the sympathy because they're like immigrants and have like had all these experience and stuff, right?
Right. Which like historically, sure, Irish people were treated quite poorly, but this is present day and they're Irish in America. In New England, like,
yeah.
They're probably doing just fine.
Right. So another thing we can talk about as far as some things from the past and the university experience that Avery goes through is Professor Talley and his class. And there's just kind of a lot of fun dynamics we're going to have to get into as far as Professor Talley. But we can at least start here. So one thing he even mentions in the first half of the book, or maybe Avery mentions it about him, is that he makes a pretty strong point of like, oh, I as a teacher do not give athletes special treatment. But I don't know about you, but it does feel like he gives athletes special treatment, just in like the opposite direction. It doesn't feel like he's treating them the same as everyone else, given everything we get in this book.
Yeah, he's definitely biased against them.
He like kind of bullies them almost, right? Like the way he talks about them in the first class and like the words he uses to describe Avery, it's the other extreme.
He's like, there were 3 athletes in this class. One of you will do well. The others, no. And it's like,
right.
Okay, you didn't need to say anything, to be honest.
And like, I think a lot of how I feel about Talley as a teacher is going to be informed from what I know from teaching, which is like, I think college professors just lack in teaching in a lot of ways in general because they're not held to the same standards that public school teachers are. But generally, like, I was taught to see the failure of students in your class as your own, right? Like, it shouldn't be a point of pride that 3 athletes in your class, that if you get 3 athletes in your class, at least 2 of them will fail. Like, what are you doing to support your students and their diverse needs? Like, it sounds like nothing, right? That's like, your job is to teach them, and if your kids or if your students are failing, that means you're failing to teach them. So the fact that and it's so easy because college students are adults for college professors to push that off onto the students, and there is a degree to which things are college students' responsibility to do, but you can provide a baseline level of support for them,
I mean, yeah, we've heard instances. I work in a university now, but like, even going through college, there are always stories of those professors who see it as like a point of pride if not everybody gets an A, like, and it's like, why do you not want everybody to do well? Like, that doesn't mean your class is easy if everybody gets an A. It could, but it also could just mean you're good at your job. you should want everybody to succeed.
Your students are going to have gotten things out of your class, right? Like, it's going to motivate them to learn more, and they're going to have, it's a sign of success, a sign that you taught them something. And like even on the easy class comment, like I've definitely had classes I would call easy classes where probably everyone got an A, and I definitely learned more out of some of those classes than ones I didn't do so well in, right? So
For sure.
it should be a marker of success. It's just a shame to see this, because I know it's real. Like, I know professors actually behave this poorly.
Yeah, and he has like bullshit rules that we see all the time, like the absence policies, which
Yes.
are just nonsense.
Like, why should a grade reflect your attendance instead of your performance?
Absolutely. And in an English class, like,
Yeah.
you don't need to be there. As an English major, I'm saying this to you. You do not need to be there, especially with a teacher like this.
Yeah.
He is basically saying, oh, I'm only there to teach. And it's like, okay, sure. Then you might as well just give me the book and your lecture in a PowerPoint format and not be there.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point?
Exactly, yeah.
So, like, absence policies, they make no sense. And it's, like, such an issue if you're, like, what if you're chronically ill? Like, I guess you have a medical reason if you get lucky enough to be able to get
that, yeah.
a medical reason or accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
And counting your sports absences as absences for that class is also bullshit. It's not like Avery decided when she has to be away for her matches. Like,
there's also clearly a system in place. On day one, she had notes from her coach being like, here are the dates she's out for me, right? And he just threw those out. I'm like, I just feel like now we're just breaking policy. Like, I feel like this note wouldn't have been so ready to go and ready on day one if there wasn't already a policy in place for this.
Right. Like, it's college. Like, your schedule is way more loose in college, and affordances can be given.
Mm-hmm.
And I will just say, in case anybody was curious, the idea of, like, marking down a letter grade for an essay, depending on grammar, that's real. I've had classes where, like, if you had one comma splice, you'd get marked down a letter grade.
Oh my god.
Which is bullshit, because let me say right now, grammar doesn't fucking exist.
Don't gotta tell me.
If you look at any old writing, they were putting commas all over the fucking place. Like, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
The rules weren't as structured as they are now. And the only reason they're structured now is because people want to teach about grammar, as if it means anything.
You and I could probably get together and make a pretty good lecture about the bullshit of grammar.
Right.
Between the English and the linguistics aspects, because I totally agree.
It's just nonsense.
It's just crazy too, because I don't know, like, not everyone comes into college the same way with the same background. Like, if someone comes into college, if they're taking your freshman seminar in writing, in English at least, and they have grammar issues, like, you need to tell that student to get some tutoring or to come to office hours and get some help, not just freaking berate them for it. Not everyone had the same background, even in an Ivy League.
Even in an Ivy League, especially now. Yeah, this book isn't 2024, but this more modern education landscape, students don't even know how to do research coming into college. Like, right. And that is only going down the drain even more, especially with all of the nonsense with misinformation and AI and bullshit like that. Like, Tally is just the devil incarnate as a teacher. Like, I would hate to be in his class.
Me too. Which leads me to another point. That point is that Avery should have just dropped this class, and probably no one told her to do that.
Yeah,
which is like another major issue. Like, where is the advising? Where's the mentorship? Like, I don't know. When I came into college, I felt very lucky to have. I had a freshman advisor. I had a freshman counselor, which was kind of like an RA who had some sort of academic power as well. Like, I don't know. I just felt like my school did a good job of setting me up with a lot of people to complain to, and so they would give me the advice of like, if things are really going that poorly, you probably shouldn't be in that class. And I dropped a couple classes in college, and I feel like it saved my ass every single time. Didn't regret a single one. I even went back to take one of them again, and that was fine too. Like, this amount of pressure on just a single class in your freshman year, like freaking ruining your life, is not worth the class. And I need the person, like her coach honestly left something to be desired too. Like, someone in a mentorship position to tell her, it's okay to just drop that class. You'll make it up later.
Yeah, as somebody who failed out of a class when I was in college because I hated the teacher so much I refused to go, it also, like, look at me, full-time job, working at a university.
How much did it matter in the end, right?
Didn't matter at all. But yeah, it's this, she's always been this golden child. She's been perfect academically. She's had to try, obviously, but also she's had no choice but to try. So her repetition of this, she can fix it, she can fix it. And Tally brings this up later, like, why didn't you just transfer? Why didn't you just drop out? And it's like, nobody told her. Like, when you're so perfect academically, why would you ever think you need to drop out or transfer or change your major or do anything? Like, I was doing perfectly well in college as an education English major, and the only reason I dropped education is because I had a good teacher who I talked to, and I realized I didn't even want to teach at all. Like, why am I getting the major for something I'm not even going to use and I don't want? But that's because I had the support of a teacher who was like, no, it's fine if you drop it. Like, there's no reason, like, why would you keep it? Like, I was being silly in this scenario, but it hadn't crossed my mind as something I could do until I had the support system in place. Like, and she has nobody. She has nobody. Because who is she going to talk to? Like, her parents? As if. Right? Like, obviously not.
It's such a big oversight on this school to not understand the type of student it's recruiting, right? Like, there's obviously, like, other students like Avery who come in, like, overachievers and not really knowing what is available to them is, like, honestly, I would say an especially big issue at a prestigious university is, like, kids, like, they've never had a tutor because they've had to do it their own the whole time. And those are the kids who end up suffering the most because they don't know how to use all those resources. Like, where's that missing link? Like, they, obviously this is a fictional university, but they should know. They should be addressing it.
But that kind of does wrap up her descent into that whole situation we see at the beginning of the book. Tally isn't just the teacher that hates her guts. He's like the catalyst for her suicide attempt, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. I guess that and like the soccer stuff too, but honestly, it feels secondary to the class.
Yeah, the reason she gets kicked out of soccer is because she does poorly in Tally's class, and it's like, it's a lot on him that he takes he just doesn't deal with. But we can talk about that. But getting to the present tense, everybody is it's actually quite casual.
Yeah. There's some weird behavior in the second half of the book. Like, we've spent so much of the first half being like, we need to bunker down and like protect ourselves, and like it's a scary world out there, like all this craziness in the cities and blood on the lawn, which never comes up again. So there's a few things that happen. They go to a party, which stupid in my opinion. That's
absolutely stupid. Yeah,
why would you do that? Like, and they even said it, right? They're like, oh, like this is a horrible idea, so we're going, right? Like, yeah, classic teenagers, I guess. Which does cause problems for them because then they run into freaking Clayton and like, I don't know. I don't know why. Maybe this is a biased opinion, but why you would go back to a high school party after you spent like a year or whatever, how much time they were in college, That's fake. I kind of did something similar to that when I came back, but I still don't believe why they would do it in this case.
Well, it doesn't make sense because none of them even really liked high school. Like,
exactly. They don't like these people.
Aisha isn't even from here.
Yes.
And Avery was nice to everybody, but that really just means you did not care about any of those people.
Yeah.
And Cass was like the lesbian of the school, so It's not like she had a lot of friends either. Sorry, girl. So yeah, it is like, why would you go? And I think it is kind of Cass that pushes it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But it is just reckless for the sake of being reckless, which is kind of how Cass is writing throughout this entire book.
Yeah, I guess with some influence from her parents on that.
Ugh, who also, parents, by the way, never show up again.
Never back. Yeah, you kind of called that too. You're like, we might never see them again, and we didn't. So that was stupid. I also did think it was funny that there was just like a casual background orgy in this scene.
Oh my
like,
God,
that
so annoying.
Really just like didn't need to be there, but was kind of funny. They also like, so they do their like, they go to the movies for a date because they're like, oh, we never like got a real first date, and we are going to pretend like it's the old world. Newsflash, it's not. They go to the movies, and that's like when they leave the door unlocked and the house gets robbed by Clayton as a result. Whole thing. I just thought that was kind of stupid too. Like, just leaving the house, I feel like it's just kind of a stupid concept right now. I don't know, call me radical on this, but it just doesn't make sense. They go to church, and that's a whole thing. Of course, that's the only thing that really seems to be okay. That's not true. They go to the beach also, and that turns out okay too. Also seems risky that they left Aisha and Ray by themselves there because it's not their house even. So I just don't understand like how this behavior shift could be justified in such a dire situation.
It does feel like so much of the first part of the book is like, you have to be careful even when you're going out getting materials. Like, you need to be cautious. And then the second half of the book is like, fuck that noise. Like, let's do whatever we want. And it is kind of like that influence of the world's ending anyway, so who cares? So that's fine. But
like, the fact that Avery's parents are cool with them going to this party is unbelievable, actually.
Yeah, well, to be fair, they lied about how close the party was, but
Sure,
even
yeah.
a close party felt
Yeah.
like crazy to let
I agree.
3 girls go to. Like,
Especially one who's unfamiliar with the area, yeah.
yeah. And yeah, leaving Aisha and Ray not only home alone, but eventually giving them Peter's house was also crazy to me. Like,
Kinda
why
weird.
would you split your resources and leave these 2 girls on their own? Like,
Yeah.
it felt so dangerous because it's not like Clayton
antithetical to all
dies.
the effort put into the bunker situation of like, we need to be, and like even Avery's mom being like, oh, don't go to Brooklyn, we'll bring them up here. Like, that clearly they have a thing about like a nuclear thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, they do think the bunker is like a dead idea. They don't think it's gonna work after they get robbed, which I don't know. I feel like it's still fine. Like, you
I
can
do
still
too.
huddle in your basement and you'll probably survive. You won't have as many resources afterwards, but you can figure that out later. Completely giving up seemed kind of crazy. Well, okay, I guess. But yeah, everything, it like, the second half of the book just does not feel like the world is ending. Like, everybody is just going everywhere, and it's like, where are you getting all this gas? Because they are driving
Yes.
everywhere.
Yes, yeah. That's also a good point. Because I figured in a situation like this, gas is gone. Like, if you didn't get it the first day, you didn't get it.
Right. And like, even leaving your vehicle outside would probably be dangerous because you can just siphon the gas out. People would do that. Like,
They would 100%
you could not
do that if
convince
they're
me
doing
otherwise.
all the other stuff they're doing.
Absolutely.
I mentioned earlier of like how this, I think this half of the book was the romance, right? Like, I think we just kind of had 2 different genres in this book, and they weren't super intermixed. It was really like the first half of the book was like that kind of apocalyptic doomsday kind of vibe, right? And the second half of the book is really a romance, and it isn't exactly structured like a romance. I mean, there's definitely some things there, some structure around for it, but that's really what matters in this half of the book. And so I do think that the apocalyptic part of the story suffered because that was the focus. I don't want to say it wasn't accidental. Maybe it was, but just like I feel like because that became the focus, it didn't really matter. Maybe it didn't matter to the author anymore to be that specific about the apocalyptic state of things and just kind of lean more into resolving that part of the story, which also led to like some other things not being resolved.
Right. Yeah, I can get what you mean because it did feel like they needed to hit certain romantic beats. Like, we did get an Avery and Cass fight in this book when Avery like runs in to save her parents during like the robbery or whatever.
Yeah.
Which, like, first of all, Cass should not be upset about that. Like, upset, sure. Angry, no.
Yeah, I agree.
It's her parents who she seemingly loves still. So why would you not run into the house? That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of mad at her for the gunshots that she didn't shoot too.
Right. Like, what did you want her to do? But yeah, the Cass and Avery relationship is put into like some turmoil because of the break-in. So we get the fight that we were anticipating in a way. And we do get Cass kind of being like, it's not even that she's, how do I phrase this? It's interesting. We did kind of talk about this. Cass, not necessarily tying Avery's will to live to her, but she does the opposite. She's like, Avery is my reason for like being alive still. She does that. But then like 2 scenes later is like, but I have to go to New York. So it's like, what is happening? So the romance is weird. Like, we're getting typical beats, but the pacing is just off. And I think it's the author trying to mix this like codependence at the end of the world, which would make sense, but is like inherently a bit toxic, with trying to make these characters develop on their own by going to New York and by going back to Eton and like doing that stuff. But it's like within their time frame, those 2 things can't really coexist very well.
Yeah.
So I feel like the romance just ends up feeling a bit skewed.
Yeah. So yeah, we can get back if we want to talk a little bit more about this kind of erratic end of world behavior that's happening. There's some things that make more sense than the partying and the church going and stuff. So, though maybe not the very first thing I'm going to bring up, which is so Clayton, he shows up at this party and is like, Avery, you owe me, and like starts being a major creep, and Aisha comes in for the save, thank God, because I don't know why no one else did after all the weirdness he was doing. And it comes back to fucking haunt them. I thought that was just going to be over, but Clayton is the one who like does the whole break-in bullshit and like tying up her family and all, and is like, well, you kind of owed me. And it's like, oh my God, like, how could he be more like abhorrent? And the thing that like really truly annoyed me, and this is maybe a part of what makes me agree with you on like this part of the book almost feels unnecessary, is this whole like, oh, like I'm not a monster though. Like I wouldn't kill you guys. Like I'm not a monster. And it's like, my dude, like you basically killed them though. Like you took away all their livelihood, any chance they had of like surviving, for any amount of time. And also kind of took away a little bit of will to live from all of them because they've kind of given up. So just like, I don't know, he's just the worst character ever, I feel. And I wrote in the notes that like he's definitely, if the world was going on, he would definitely be like an Elon Musk type CEO where he's like, well, like I'm doing it for the greater good, so it's okay if I have slaves in Africa,
That's crazy.
I just feel like that's the justification that's coming out here, that I'm not a monster even though I'm basically doing the same shit, just kind of extending it, just justifying it to himself that he's like just like anyone else.
Right, because it's not even that he takes their food, which is like, okay, intent could be fine there if he's also trying to save his family. Whatever, it's a tough situation. But Clayton took everything. Like, he took, like, her scrapbook, like, their flags, like, all of the shit he did not need to take, but he took. And it's like, sir, what else would be a monster? Like, you are doing cruelty for the sake of cruelty. That is a monster. Yeah. I don't know how to tell you.
Well, yeah, I think there's probably some baked-in homophobia behind this stuff, right? Especially if Cass isn't really a secret, the fact that he took all of this personal stuff and like the fact that he came out with this whole "you owe me" nonsense, it felt, it felt like that language was, in part because they were women, but because he's like, oh, like why shouldn't this person want a man, Mm-hmm. It fits in. I know he never said those things per se, but like it just fits in with that kind of behavior.
Yeah, well, he does make a note of saying, like, he was in love with Avery, right?
Which is
like,
nuts. That's actually the least believable part of this.
Yeah. He loved her, so obviously she was meant to love him in return and probably sleep with him at prom and, like, do all of that bullshit. Mm-hmm. And it's like, maybe you liked her, sure, but, like, grow up.
He kind of did the nice guy thing, too, of like, oh, I was so good to you at
my
prom.
God. He did. I had a note about that. He did the nice guy thing. He was like, it doesn't pay to be a nice guy. Right. Basically. Like, I didn't get anything out of it. Boo-hoo. Yeah. And I'm like, shut up. But it is surprising Clayton gets brought up again in, like, the rescue mission of their stuff. And it's pointless. Like, it is... There's no reason for Avery and Cass to go there and then accomplish nothing.
Yes.
And I guess the point is, like, sometimes you try something and it doesn't work out, and, like, that's fine. But
maybe it was just to give you some hope, right? Because if they find the food and stuff, maybe Cass will stay.
Right. But why? Like, why put them... Is it just another situation that can scare Avery into being like, I have to live now. Like, I don't want to die. And
maybe, yeah.
Cass almost loses her life. And, like, the fear of that is kind of fuel as well for wanting to care about her and wanting to be alive to, like, protect her, whatever the reason is. But it just felt like it honestly felt like goofy. Like, it felt goofy for them to go there. And I agree. The whole situation was just pointless. I don't know.
I guess, like, to its credit, it does kind of revisit the genre of the first half of the book that goes missing, right? Like, this kind of more raw, like, yeah, like, actually end-of-world behavior of what people would do in this situation. There is some kind of silliness about the fact that it's, like, revenge for revenge. Like, it's, like, way too extra, but I kind of get it from that angle of, like, this part of the book and actually the robbery that happens to begin with kind of give me, like, Purge vibes, which I do feel like is kind of the same category as what the original, the initial fear of the end of the world feeling was like.
Yeah. It's just, like, we got a hint of it with the blood in the first half of the book, right? And then we got nothing. We got nothing else until this robbery happened, and then the rebuttal to this robbery. It just feels out of place because it's mixed in with these moments in which they can go anywhere. Like, they go to the movies, they go to the beach, and nothing happens.
Sure, yeah.
Like, even the party, nothing really happens other than an orgy, which is, like, okay, I guess, but you're telling me, like, nothing bad happened? That seems crazy. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's just, like, a weird mix of things happening. It makes sense when you say it. Like, if you took out the other stuff and was like, somebody robbed somebody and they tried to get it back and it went wrong, I was like, okay, I've seen The Walking Dead. I believe it. But mixed in with everything else, it just feels, like, out of place. Like, everything feels a bit out of place. Like, I feel like there's too much. There's too much going on in this book a little bit with everything. And so everything else, it just, I don't know.
We can maybe mention Aisha as well has a moment related to that party because she finds out that her sister is alive and coming to Kilkenny to
Looks
join
crazy.
them in their it's crazy, yeah, in their sort of post-apocalyptic bunker or non-bunker situation, which like does fully reveal like what was up with the sister, because all we heard was that she was lost, which I think we did notice was kind of intentional language, but I kind of was just suspicious that it was also like a suicide connection. But it wasn't. She's alive. She's just queer and had to be low-key exiled from her home. So
Yeah. Which is, obviously, it's a situation that kind of mirrors what Avery's going through, or what she could go through, right? Like, it's not, it wouldn't be unexpected if her parents kicked her out for being queer. Like, we've seen stories like that 100 million times.
mm-hmm.
So it is kind of like, Aisha will accept you, Avery, because her sister is queer, and like, vice versa. Like, Ray feels so comfortable there because Aisha seems to care about Avery. And I'm like, that's great. But I don't, even that storyline felt slightly incomplete, because it's like, Aisha's like, oh, when this is over, like, you know, we can be a family again. Like, our parents, you know, you shouldn't have left. You shouldn't have left. Crazy thing to say.
Definitely a little self-centered on that one.
Yeah, but this idea of like family accepting you regardless is Avery kind of gets to experience that with the church, but it could be brought into question how authentic it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like good for Avery to see a queer like thriving, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
seemingly after losing her entire family. But even this connection between these two characters isn't really discussed. Like, I don't think Ray and Avery have a single conversation.
No.
But it could have been a very interesting dynamic between them, especially if Ray became that sort of mentor figure for her, if they had more time. So it was just another thing that felt like more could have been given to it, or it should have just been cut out, to be honest.
I don't think the Ray relationship or the Ray character really paid off, other than to like give Aisha a bit of depth, I suppose, and like a secret of her own for us to question her kind of opinion on secrets with. But it really could have been, we could have seen more. Yeah, you're totally right, like more positive queer connection here.
Yeah. It also always just feels like a shortcut to make, I mean, obviously Aisha is queer herself, but being ace is way different than being a lesbian. Like, it nobody has to know I'm ace. Like, it's not something anybody really will know about except for somebody I'm with, right? But being a lesbian, you're obviously pursuing you're obviously not going for a man in that scenario, right? And so you are visibly different.
Yeah, exactly.
There's very little possibility Aisha will have an issue with her parents, who probably don't even know what asexuality is. And also, it'll probably never get brought up in conversation because it's none of their business, to be honest. So it's like, it just feels like a cheap way to make Aisha accepting of Avery by saying, oh, but I have a queer sister, so I understand you. I just think Aisha and Avery's relationship, and the way Avery kind of thinks of Aisha as part of her family, that was fine on its own. Like, we didn't need Ray's character to kind of strengthen that bond between them.
I have no further thoughts. I agree.
Someone else that Avery thinks of as family is obviously Cass. It's like Cass, Avery, and Aisha that are all together when Avery has that thought. But clearly, you know, the Cass-Avery relationship is way different. Which, like, friendship, great basis for being in love. I said that last time, but it is, like, I thought we were going to get kind of more doubts about this relationship. It's the end of the world, Cass is doing whatever, and she's now proposing marriage, and you're getting married on a beach, and it's like, everything is happening so quick, how do you believe it's real? Like, I thought that was going to be more of an aspect. Like, how do you know this person is genuine about their feelings when the world is ending? That was an aspect of this end of world situation that, like, wasn't brought up at all.
Yeah, I don't remember that ever coming up.
Right. In this relationship, in Avery's relationship with her parents, like, none of those concerns ever seem to be concerns, which is strange. Like, it is another way in which the end of world is kind of dropped for the sake of this romance. Like, we just have to believe they love each other and they believe it, and it's fine.
I mean, just the way we have to believe that her parents flipped on a dime and were like so down for them to be dating. Like none of the stuff that we were concerned about happened, where it was like they're gonna split them up into different rooms and like I don't know, be like kind of bring down the wall of the hammer or whatever, on this relationship. Like they were just like, no, like my daughter is gay and like we support her girlfriend. Like it's a very like
so crazy
quick turnaround, and like that's supposed to be believable.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be believable because it happens in like this public setting, and it's like it's performative. Like there is no conversation that happens between Avery and her parents one-on-one. The only one that does is about Devin, and that's because Avery asked. There is no genuine conversation. It's just okay, but we're supposed to believe Avery is lucky to have parents like this. I don't fucking buy it.
That
like
was
fuck
stupid.
that.
That was stupid. Yeah, I didn't really think about the fact that the individual conversations were missing. Like when they came out with that at the church, I was like, oh, like finally they're saying something. But it is like really bold, and also like just like don't out people like that,
Right. Yeah. That is true as well. Like damn, really, to the whole congregation,
Just
I guess.
out with it. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was though like the part of that where I was cheering for her mom was talking about Devin and like apologizing for not doing so. Really.
Yeah, the only thing that bothered me about that is she like publicly apologized about Devin, but then there was no instance in which she kind of talked to Avery and Peter about it. Like I mentioned, Avery had to ask, like, tell me about Aunt
Yeah.
Devin. Like she had to ask for the information, and it felt like it could have organically kind of been the mother being like, let me tell you about my sister.
Mm.
And it could have been a kind of like healing conversation that the parents instigated, because the parents don't really instigate anything.
Mm.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We were talking about Cass.
Yes, sorry.
It's okay. There's a lot to say.
There really is. So one thing we haven't addressed yet that has, I would say, kind of bothered me about their relationship was this idea that Avery doesn't really speak super openly about herself, and like when they have conversations, it's really just like asking questions about Cass's life in New York, but isn't really like talking about Avery. And it kind of creates this bad vibe between them where Cass is like, I want to know about your life. Like, why don't you tell me anything? And so when Aisha is like, oh, like, Avery, Queen of Secrets, this really upsets Cass. And she kind of has this I don't know, what's the word I want to say here? I don't know, just like this repeated idea of like, I deserve to know everything about you. Like, why don't you tell me literally everything? And I can understand the angle she's coming from, in that she definitely wants to know more, and Avery probably if this is going to be a relationship, it needs to go two ways. They should be open with each other. I also can't really sympathize with the idea that should be absolutely everything. Like I maybe this is just, at least in my relationship, I really think I value individuality, and like while we tell each other just about everything that I think is relevant to say, like to feel like this pressure to like report everything I'm feeling in every moment of my day. It's like, well, I want conversations to feel positive, incentivizing, and not, like, I don't know, it feels punitive. I don't know if that's the right word, but it feels like I don't own my own conversation, my own thoughts at that point. It's like they all belong to someone else. So I don't really I feel like this is an unhealthy place to start with communication between them.
Yeah, because there is this kind of line that Avery is riding between like, you need to reach out for help, but also the idea of people should be supporting you, even if you're not saying anything. And there is an aspect of like, she needs to tell people if she's not all right. That is true in some regards, but there's a difference between being insistent to be supportive and like kind of being like a constant force of I'll listen to you, it'll be like I'll listen to you, and like that kind of support, and being like, you need to tell me, like
exactly.
And the kind of bitterness that Cass has about not knowing is also an issue.
Yeah, I like the angle of like it should be supportive, right? Like that's where it should be coming from. Make it kind of in the same place that Tally lacks, right? Like create the environment where someone is comfortable doing that. Like don't force them.
Yeah, and it could feel like time is running out, but it kind of speaks to this imbalance we talked about in the first episode. These are supposed to be best friends, right? And you're saying the entire time they've been best friends, Cass has not been able to kind of figure out how to be supportive to Avery. Like,
I mean, I guess that's the problem. But yeah, it does seem like that from like the things we saw in the first half of the book with like the Quince and stuff. Like, I mean, Avery's always been a supporter for Cass, and like Cass hasn't even been all that gracious about it. You don't really see times where they were growing up where it went the other direction.
Right. And part of that is Avery's, I don't want to say fault, but she has, like I mentioned, like made it very easy to to be around her. Like, she doesn't broadcast her feelings a lot, but I don't know. It's like, even in this environment, Cass hasn't created that feeling that Avery can be honest. And part of that is fear of, like, losing Cass, and, like, Cass being almost disgusted by what she's thinking about doing and all of this stuff. But it's so weird that environment doesn't seem to exist anywhere. Like, obviously she can't tell her parents about it, and she doesn't. Just flat out, she does not tell her parents. She says, like, oh, I'm sad all the time, like that, but she's not completely honest with her parents even at the end of this book. Tally is garbage. Aisha knows, but they, like, don't have an honest conversation about it. Cass is, strangely, she's kind of the one that's like, you should want to live, and, like, that's her advice basically. I don't know. And it's strange because Avery never even gets to talk to Peter. Like, I don't think they have one conversation in the second half of this book, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it's like, nobody here. Like, it does go the romance route almost. Like, Cass becomes number one in Avery's head, and, like, her reason for being alive, but not because other people suck. Like, Peter's right there, but because nobody else is, like, showing up.
You know, it's looking out for her.
It is intentional writing, I think. Like, Cass is the only one there consistently, but that's not because nobody else is willing to be there, but it's just, like, how it worked out in the book. Like, it's so strange. And then I think it's also a problem that, like, Cass is seemingly trying to be supportive and, like, trying to understand Avery, and I think that makes sense in Cass's head, but then her pushiness about it and her kind of almost irritation that Avery, like, can't take a compliment and, like, doesn't seem to believe her, it almost gets absolved when Cass is like, but I also think about suicide. And it's like, oh, okay. I guess we're the same then.
Right. No, because that never really does actually get worked out. And it's funny because Cass, you know, expresses these frustrations with Avery, and so does Aisha, of, like, trying to fix things that she can't fix, but then is, like, upset when her words don't really work on Avery. Like, you also can't fix Avery. Like, this is not the sort of support you want. Why would you think it's the sort of support she wants?
Right.
And it just doesn't work. She's, like, a kind of aggressive about it. Like, oh, like, why don't you see, like, how good you have it? And, like, you're so smart. You're so this. And it's like, you know, oh, like, now you fail and suddenly you want to kill yourself. It's like, girl, this is not the right approach.
Yeah, because she does have that perspective, like, during college. Like, Cass is doing great in college, so it's like, it's not a problem for her. But it's like, oh, Avery, you always try to be excellent, and, like, you'll find yourself in college. Like, it'll get better. Like, it doesn't matter if you fail. Like, I'm used to failing, so it shouldn't matter if you fail. And it's like, this is not the same. This is the instance in which Avery should have been like, I have, like, hyper religious parents and have always been, like, put on this pedestal for everything. We are not the same in this scenario, Cass.
Right.
Like, you cannot relate to my situation here.
This is a moment where she finally gets to say that, because Cass certainly does.
Right, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't come up.
Avery just kind of has to take it, and, like, we're supposed to believe it does fix Avery somehow. It's hard to describe. It's just, she's trying, I think, to be supportive, but just because, like, you found yourself in college doesn't mean Avery will have the same experience. Like, and Avery does, I guess, set that boundary for herself eventually. Like, no, I don't want to go to New York. I won't find myself in New York, which is good. But yeah, their situations are just not compatible. Even if they were both depressed, like, it's not the same.
This is just, like, why I think this wouldn't work out in the long run, if there is a long run to be had, because the communication just isn't really there. And even though they've been friends for so long, like, it isn't. And I don't think Cass really understands Avery, even though I think Avery understands Cass. And so it'll never really, unless that can be resolved, which I don't think it can be from, like, starting out in a freaking little marriage, you know, like, it's just set up for failure, like, or at least unhappiness in the long run. I don't know, just to me, like, I don't know, communication, this is cliche, but, like, communication really is the core of relationships, and if that's, like, the main problem that they're having right to begin with, you know?
Yeah, and I don't think it helps that because of Avery's depression, she always feels like she's to blame. So even when they fight, I was worried about this when they fought, actually. I thought Avery was going to apologize for, like, running into the house, whatever. Although I don't think Cass ever apologizes for getting angry.
When does Cass apologize in this book?
I know. A lot of people don't apologize for the shit they did, to be honest, which is kind of bullshit. But it feels like a lot of Cass talks about how things should be, or like how the future will look, or any of this stuff, and Avery just kind of accepts it. And she does set her own boundaries, like she goes to Eton by herself, but I don't know, I just feel like she doesn't say any of it. Like, she's not the one saying, this is what the future is going to look like. And part of that is because she doesn't know what the future is going to look like, but there's a lot of this relationship that's built very quickly on Cass kind of setting up the scenario. Like, even the date is like Cass's idea, and then Avery does it for Cass.
Right.
I don't know. It is a shaky foundation.
At least they don't have to last much longer, I guess. Like, we don't know that, but
that's crazy.
You know, hypothetically. I thought it was kind of nuts of Avery to plan to stay at Eton until the asteroid hit. I kind of thought they were going to come back. Like, I thought she was going to come back, I should say. Like, before. I thought it was just going to be, like, she's going on retreat, right? Like, she kind of does this cool, like, mental health and writing and exploration of self thing up at Eton. But I did think that was, like, just to hold over till the end, which she would spend with her family, who she had decided she wanted to be with.
Right. Oh my God. Because she was like, I'm not going to New York. I need to stay with my family. And I'm like, okay, makes sense. And then she's like, actually, parents, I need to go be alone.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I guess. That's kind of crazy.
And then she had to take Tally's dog, which is just ridiculous.
Oh my God.
Why does Tally have this dog? Because he keeps on pawning it off.
For sure. And obviously, I think he gave it so that she wouldn't kill herself at Eton, because then there's just a dog that's alone.
Yeah.
Which is like a subtle nod, I guess, to him actually caring about her. But he's saying he cares, but boy, has he not fucking shown it this entire goddamn book.
Yeah.
I feel like I complained a lot about Cass.
It is what it is. Honestly, I don't mean to hate on Cass so much, because I don't think it's that she's like a horrible person, really. But I just don't think that the communication style is good. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's not helped that a lot of the childhood we get to see of them is kind of Cass leading their relationship, basically. Like, a lot of the things Avery does, like going into the water and just the way they're kind of built together, is a lot of Avery following after Cass. Like, it feels a lot like Avery is constantly trying to catch up to Cass. And that's, then they're obviously not on, like, equal footing. I don't know. And there is a certain desperation to their relationship being at the end of the world that, like, isn't discussed enough, I think, in this book.
Yeah.
Which we mentioned before, with me thinking there would be more moments of doubt.
Yeah.
It's just like a shaky relationship. But it's enough for Avery, I guess, because she wants to live again.
Yeah. I did kind of want to ask that question of, like, do we really think it was the relationship that changed that for her? Because I kind of think it might have been, like, the church thing, honestly.
There are definitely instances where she is with Cass and she feels alive, right? Like, she feels that spark of something again, which is fine. Like, as long as it's not all-encompassing, it's like, fine if somebody makes you feel alive. Like, we did talk about this in the first part. Like, living for others, as long as it's not, like, your entire will to live, it's you know, it makes sense. So, yeah, I don't think it's completely the romance that necessarily saves her. But it is partly the romance that makes her have that, I think, shift in perspective, right? Like, it is Cass that says, you're so lucky, Avery, and she kind of has to believe it. Like, that change in perspective doesn't feel very organic to me, like that church moment.
It just, I guess, because at the end of that church thing, like, she feels like, oh, I'm all accepted now, you know? I feel like, oh, the family loves me, like, and that was, like, so missing before. I did feel like after that scene, like, she kind of had the whole, like, I've got what I'm missing now.
Yeah, which is, I think it's just, like, a fault in the way the family is written in this, which obviously I'm not from a super religious family, but speaking, like, in regards to it being a book, there were so many instances in which Avery is still performing. Like, she still prays with her parents, and, like, she goes to church with them, and, like, she's playing along to their religion, but she doesn't believe in it, right? Like, that is never brought up. We never have that moment with her religion, which we thought might happen. So seemingly she doesn't care about it herself. She still does it for her parents. So it's like, how accepted are you really? Like, your parents only accepted you as gay because the world was ending. Like, that's not luck. That's tragic. Like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
And this idea that you can't be completely honest about what was happening with you, that you wanted to kill yourself. And like, you can't be completely honest about the fact that you don't pray anymore. Like, you may perform it, but you do not pray. Like, you don't wish for anything. Like, none of those things are brought up or discussed. And so it's like, are you accepted by your parents? Like, are you really? You're still protecting them so they think highly of you. So that seeming shift in perspective where she's supposed to feel lucky now for the family she has, it did not hit for me.
It doesn't
like,
land, yeah.
And it could have, right? It maybe not with the parents, but I just think like there was a weird idea brought up in this book, right? Where Avery is like, Cass and Aisha, they're my family, my found family. And so we get hints of the possibility of found family and that being enough. And the idea of her being close to Peter and like that being her family. And it's like, okay, that's all you need. Like, and this is coming from the perspective of somebody who like isn't entirely close with their family. Like, make your own. And part of that is in this book. Part of it, just a small bit. But then it also has storylines like Aisha, right? And her sister and like that family mattering so much. And Avery seemingly being accepted by her parents and like them still having a quote unquote strong relationship, which is nothing but sure. And so we have like blood family still being exceedingly important in this. And it's sure you can have both. They can both exist, but like it made Aisha's storyline feel like it was only supposed to reinforce Avery's care for her own blood family. But Avery's situation with her own family wasn't discussed or dealt with in any meaningful way because she didn't talk to Peter, like at all, who's like really her only family, and her relationship with her parents wasn't explored in any meaningful capacity. It was kind of just swept under the rug, basically, towards the end of the book. And it's like, that's the family situation? Like, there's even a line where Avery is like to her parents, like, you've given me everything. And I'm like, have they? Have they? That's crazy to say, to be honest.
Yeah.
You can't even tell them you wanted to kill yourself. Like, you cannot. 2 weeks ago, they didn't even believe you were a lesbian. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's crazy. And maybe they didn't mean to put all these pressures on you, but would they kick you out of the house if you were like, God's not real? What would be their reaction? I'm dying to know. To be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do they actually give a shit about you?
I have kind of a similar but different perspective on this, because I was kind of thinking about it more from the angle of what is home for the characters. It felt like there was maybe a statement being made about home, particularly because of when they get into the conversation about Devon. There's this thing of like she moved to Dublin and had like a really hard time there, and like, I don't know, they mentioned, Tally mentions in his conversation like, oh, ever since you've been home, like you've kind of been like, I don't know, thriving, which I think is inaccurate, but that was like his perspective, and it made me feel like the author was trying to make a point about like home is where happiness is, which
Mm-hmm.
Though on the other hand, like the counterpoint being like, well, Cass goes off to New York City and kind of makes home there, and she wants to go back there and has found comfort there. So there is kind of still like this found feature about home. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't know for sure that that's what the author was trying to do, but it does feel like there's this tug between is family home or is chosen family home. Also, Cass calls Avery home, like literally when they do their little marriage thing. So that was another part that made me think maybe this is the point the author's trying to make. I generally think asking questions about what home is always an interesting question to me, but I don't like it when it feels like the point is to go literally home, and that is like the answer to sadness or like feeling lost, especially when home is kind of like you've been saying, like not really comfortable and not stable and not, in this case, accepting, and never was. So why would that be the solution to the problem? And it probably wouldn't have been the solution to Devon's problems either, right? So I don't know that that's, I speak with this with hesitance because I don't know if that's really the point that the author was trying to make. I just found a little bit of a thread about it.
No, I do get what you mean. I also think there's a distinction between like Cass needing, like Cass's idea of the future being her working in New York, but Avery still being her home, like at the end of it all. I don't know why that distinction is made, because why would your home not then become New York? Like, why is, and like work-life balance, sure, but the idea that you can't have both at the same time is very strange. I don't know. But there are interesting mentions of home, like Aisha and Ray getting a new home together, which is Peter's home, right? And like the beauty in that space. But even that is like, it's a home given to them by other people. So there is kind of a found aspect in that, but even that is like blood relative home, right?
I was gonna say, and that is more on the people side, really, right? Because the reason it feels like it can have a chance at feeling like home is because it's two family members together again, blood family members.
Yeah, but Avery it's weird because she wants that, seemingly. She does choose her family at the end, at least to like protect them and stay with them. She knows she can't find home in New York, even if it means being with Cass. So she goes back to Eton, which like has never been her home,
right? And
she's always felt distant from it. It kind of ties back into like Cass's idea of college being where you find yourself, right? Like that perspective. Like for some odd reason, Avery has to go back to college to find herself, and it is strange because yes, it's good to get away and kind of be with yourself for a moment and like take a moment, but I don't know, there is something scary about that too. Like when you're relying on people to feel alive, at least until you get over this like hurdle of feeling nothing, right? Like to then go off by yourself. Maybe it's just the timeline that's strange. Like it's so quick that she has all of these fathomings, and it's just and maybe it's about like making home in yourself.
Yeah. I think there was a bit of a making home aspect to going back to Eton.
Yeah, but it's like certain places don't have to become your home just because they were meant to be. Like your childhood home doesn't have to be your home because it's where you grew up, and like college doesn't have to become your home because it's supposed to be like your second home, right? It's supposed to be the place where you find yourself. I don't know. I there's just like weird aspects of this book where it feels like Avery is being forced to heal in the ways that like symbolically make sense but like aren't entirely realistic, and it all happens within like 2 days. So it's like made slightly worse.
We kind of ended up doing a lot of the end conversations there.
Yeah.
We could probably just move to reviews. Is there anything to say about the end, really? The asteroid comes, we don't know what happens in the end. You know.
That's crazy.
This is a little more confirming. We've been referring to another book a lot. I don't know if we want to name it, but the other book we read we didn't even get this close to knowing what happened at the end, honestly.
Yeah, I think there was just a light.
It was a light
in the other book.
Yeah, who knows what the heck that was? Yeah, we couldn't tell, and that one was much more up in the air about if it was like an apocalyptic ending or not. This one, it's like certain, right? Like the asteroid definitely hit. So
yeah, the only thing we don't really know is like what the impact is actually like.
Yeah, we don't actually know if like the East Coast had a chance or not.
Yeah. So end of book over, blah blah blah. Review wise, do you want to go first?
I would say overall enjoyable reading experience. I think with many books, the second half was just not quite like I expected it to be per se, but it wasn't bad in my opinion. Definitely some bold exploration of relationship with religion that I wish had been resolved a little bit better. I do like, just from like a personal selfish aspect, how kind of relatable it was for me to read this book, like from the less from the angle of like depression and suicidal ideation, more from the angle of like going to like an Ivy League school and like dealing with sort of those complications, like the discussion we had towards the beginning of the conversation. You know, I guess technically I do not have immigrant parents, but my immigrant grandparents, right? Like kind of dealing with like sort of weird family cultural things like that was interesting. So I don't know, I just felt like there was some cool connection points I wasn't expecting to get out of the book that maybe made me like it a bit more. So I think I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5.
Okay. So for me, obviously there are aspects of this book that I did relate to, and there was like, I think, a moment where I got a bit emotional towards the end, but I think that's just because Avery and I were very similar in like feeling like nothing and like feeling nothing, and obviously I'm going to relate to that stuff, but everything else just, there were so many aspects to this that just did not feel resolved, and it's the end of the world. Not everything is going to be resolved, clear, like obviously, whatever, but it is a story. Like if you're bringing things up, you should figure them out, probably. So I think I'm going to go with a 3.
Okay.
Like I liked it. But yeah, I just feel like it was missing some bits and bobs.
Okay. And then we can close it out with our relatively new segment of Rosebud Thorn.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I guess the rose was that I feel like the queer story wasn't too farcical, right? Like I feel like a lot of the more modern queer stories we get can be a little bit there were some parts of this that were unbelievable, but like there's a lot of it that's unbelievable. Like here it was dynamic. Like the queer relationship, it wasn't really perfect, and I do believe that like these folks would just make silly decisions about the relationship and get pseudo married on the beach given the context. Like those sorts of things where it's like this is not really a traditional story, even though it's unusual. Like it was interesting, and I think they're the sort of decisions people would make in these sorts of times. And I guess that's what I was looking for with the apocalyptic story, is that for it to not be so dramatic. I felt the risk of that during like the looting scenes in the city, but otherwise I do feel like most of this end of world behavior was kind of in line, including the way that the relationship responded to it. So I guess I kind of just like that there was a centered queer story that was a bit different than what I'm used to. I would say the thorn was probably reading the basement robbing scene. I think it just kind of made me angry, and like I guess I can understand why the author put it in there. Maybe that's the sort of effect she wanted you to get, but it was really uncomfortable to read, and I just didn't like it. Honestly, it's just that's the best words I can put on it. I would say the bud, if we're gonna take this from the aspect of like what I would want for the characters, is that what we did last time? Like what I'd want for the characters in the future?
Yeah.
I guess that's a difficult one with this book because what am I going to say? I wish that the asteroid does in fact kill them before their relationship falls apart, you know?
Oof, that's crazy.
You know, it's like I kind of just hope that, let's see, here's what I hope. I'm not going to make it about Cass and Avery. I hope that they do survive and that Peter and his family are able to make it back to New Hampshire. I don't want to see a version of this where people, because of the asteroid, end up so like disconnected from one another, and you know, communication is kind of broken down at this point. I don't want it to be so impossible to move that like they really don't ever see them again, right?
Yeah, I get you. I think for me, the rose for me would maybe be Peter, and I think Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
I wish we got more of them, obviously, in the second part, and I really wish we got more insight into Georgia as like a character.
Yeah, speaking of like a lost opportunity for a queer character.
Yeah, for sure. Like she's right there.
I did like how they like painted their house and stuff. I thought that was fun.
Yeah. And Peter had like great energy in the first part of this book. Him knowing Avery's in love with Cass and like being like, finally you guys are together. Yeah. Like all of that kind of stuff felt so authentic. It was a really good sibling relationship.
Yeah, he was with it and like empathetic.
Yeah, for sure. Thorn-wise, though, Tally is the devil. I'll say it a million times. He fucking sucks. Him saying, like, you're an adult, Avery, like, you should have reached out. You weren't depressed. Like, you didn't look depressed, whatever he said. First of all, she's, like, 18, 19. Shut up. She's not an adult. I don't care what anybody says. And the fact that she didn't look depressed enough is also bullshit. I hate that shit. You don't have to look anything to be something. And the way he also kind of dismisses her suicide attempt, too. Like, when she brings it up, he's like, oh, you wouldn't have ended your story that way. Like, he kind of passes it off. And this kind of ties into, I think, like, my main thorn of this book, which is this metaphor that gets put in at the end of this story about your life being a story. Tally brings up this idea of Avery's life needing to be a story, and then even Devin in her letter is like, I hope your life is worth telling stories about. And this idea that your life needs to be like story worthy, and that's something Avery is even interested in, because apparently she likes writing and she likes the classics. We see like none of this, by the way. It's basically told to us. So it's like this weird metaphor put in right at the end. It feels like a cheap way to kind of be like, you shouldn't kill yourself because then the story will be over. Yeah. It'll be a bad story if you do that. And it's like, who cares? Like,
not a great reason.
Yeah, that metaphor, the metaphor is like fine. It just felt forced at the end, and Tally using it to like excuse her suicide attempt was infuriating, and like, I don't know. That's my thorn. That didn't make a lot of sense, but you know, that's my thorn. The bud, though, is kind of in a similar vein to you, I think if everybody survives, I hope Peter and Georgia and Teddy are doing just fine. I liked their family. I liked how they were with Avery, although we didn't get to see enough of it. But we did kind of get that moment between Teddy and Avery, which was nice at the beach. So it'd be nice if they were, like, alive, basically. And I think if they are alive and they continue to live, Teddy is on track to, I think, become a good person.
I agree.
In, like, a very meaningful, emotional way. So, and I hope he gets to be one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's If Tomorrow Doesn't Come. Some mixed emotions, but still pretty high, average-wise, I think. Better than some of the other things we've read. So,
yeah. And happy Pride, you know.
Happy Pride to the Sapphics, especially. If you have your own thoughts and theories, it's 5050_books on Twitter. And next month, we are reading something kind of horror again. We keep coming back to it. So we're reading A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw. I don't have the book yet. Awkward. I ordered it, but it was delayed. So we're guessing on the halfway point. And also, there's no chapter numbers. John, how do you feel about it?
The thing I was complaining about last episode specifically were the chapter numbers.
So we're kind of guessing on the halfway point based on pages. I mean, we did it with Lake Lore, and it was okay. We read to different points, but we got there in the end, I guess.
Chapter off. There's worse things.
Yeah. So for this book, we are reading up to, but not including, the 5th B chapter in part 3. B being one of the characters' names, apparently. Partially in part 3. We'll figure it out. It was rough because, like, ideally we like these books that have parts, but this part 3 is, like, basically the entire book. Yeah. So it's like, what's the point?
Also, like, part 1 doesn't even have chapters in it to number, so that gets weird too. It's just, this is like my worst nightmare on chapter numbers, honestly.
Which is crazy because you picked this book.
I just say if I had known. No, I mean, I'm excited to read it, but yes, this needs to stop. Yeah. Just in the world.
Right. This book, like we mentioned, is horror. There seems to be, like, a cult aspect going on, so more religion, I guess. But this one's slightly more unhinged.
Yeah, it seems like. And definitely, like, a mystery vibe, too, right? Like, we're trying to figure out what went down with them, yeah.
Yeah. So, couple genres coming back. The mystery, the horror.
I feel like that's,
the
like,
magical realism.
A good combination of things we've enjoyed. So hopefully it lands well.
Yeah. So I guess we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.